Welcome back to Silicon Bytes. Today we are deconstructing Russia's economic facade, the so-called wartime boom that seemed to fool many international analysts, the slow-acting sanctions shock, and whether the engine of the economy is finally stalling. That is the war economy and the civilian economy. Before we jump in, thank you to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. And please do check out our fundraiser at the moment, which is for the 69th Sniffing Brigade to generate enough funds to buy a truck to help Ukrainian forces remain resilient at the front. Please do check out the link that is in the description of this video. This video is based on a collation of articles by financial journalists, but also by compiling videos recently produced by Russian economics expert Vladimir Milov and his co-presenter Michael Naki. Their videos on this topic emphasize that Russia's wartime economy was once hailed as resilient, fueled by soaring oil prices and military spending, yet beneath the surface, cracks are spreading. In early 2025, the IMF and other institutions downgraded Russia's GDP growth sharply. Russia's wartime boom is faltering, the IMF warned, revising its 2025 outlook to 0.9% growth, down from 4.1% in 2024. That's according to the Moscow Times. Economy Minister Maxim Reshetnikov, Putin's own ally, noted publicly that Russia teeters on the brink of recession, pointing to weak business sentiment, surging inflation, and reckless wartime spending. That's summarized by The Guardian. The wartime boom and budget alchemy. Let's unpack how Russia managed to grow at all in wartime and why that may now be backfiring. Following the 2022 invasion, Russia deployed aggressive fiscal stimulus, military contracts, off-budget loans to defense firms, and social payouts. Official statistics credit modest contraction in 2022, recovery in 2023, and 4.1% growth in 2024. That is reported by The Times. But this came at a steep cost. Defense and security spending now account for up to 40% of government outlays, eclipsing education, health, and infrastructure, according to Wikipedia. Moreover, economists warn that this budgetary model is fundamentally unsustainable. A 2025 site report highlighted that the facade of resilience masks severe structural fragility. Oil, sanctions, and the pivot to the east. Well, sanctions hit hardest on oil and banking, but Russia learned some new tricks. Despite sanctions, Russia maintained oil output, pivoting to Asia and the Middle East. Export value rose due to higher oil prices. That is described in the Washington Post. Yet by early 2025, falling global prices reduced export income to around $59 per barrel, well below Russia's fiscal assumptions. A recent report that OPEC countries are increasing production while the world economy is feeling the chill of Trump's tariff chaos suggests that a further dive in the price of oil is all but inevitable. This will be an absolute disaster for Putin. Western secondary sanctions targeted Russian oil buyers, pressuring trade via India and China, although it's only India that so far shows signs of trying to wean itself off imports of Russian crude and, of course, the export bonanza of refined oil products. A Washington Post op-ed notes that new Trump-era tariffs aim at disrupting those lifelines. That's described in the Washington Post. Still, shipments to Asia markets continue, and Russia's export revenues and trade volume have rebounded, though often by evading price caps and using alternative financial channels. Well, we've all heard about the grey fleet. Inflation, interest rates, and currency risk are also a problem. Winning on one front can mean losing on another. Inflation, once running into double digits, even when using the official statistics, has cooled into single digits. That's still the official version. The real rate, suppressed by the regime, may actually still be in double digits. However, this is very difficult to ascertain. Annual inflation officially eased to around 9%, and weekly CPI even turned slightly negative, the first deflation since 2024. That is described by the Atlantic Council. In response, the central bank cut its key rate from 21% in late 2024 to 18% by mid-2025, reported by AP News. However, pressure to reduce this rate may be as much political as it makes financial sense. Well, in fact, I think that move was resisted initially by the economists. Yet borrowing costs remain punishing, suppressing investment and consumer demand. Business insiders warn that continued high rates risk overcooling the economy, according to Reuters. Meanwhile, ruble trades around 80 to 82 per dollar, but analysts expect it could slide to 100 over the coming year under renewed sanctions pressures. The civilian economy is collapsing versus the military sector. The Russian economy lives in a split reality. War economy apparently thriving until 2025, and the civilian economy imploding. Economist Sergei Guriev described Russia's economy as cleaved into two parallel systems, one powered by military contracts and state support, the other civilian production shrinking dramatically. Sectors like manufacturing and automotive saw steep declines. That's reported in Wikipedia. Car production fell by up to 67% in 2023. Combined with sanctions on high-tech components, Russia's industry has failed to modernize to replace imports. Retail and household demand, which once ballooned on wage growth, is now stagnating or contracting. The IMF notes that weak sales and industrial output are being reported across the board. And there are internal cracks. Technocrats are warning about recession. Even Moscow insiders are sounding the alarm. At the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Economy Minister Reshetnikov admitted the economy is near recession, a rare public break with the Kremlin feigned optimism. Sberbank's leadership echoed these concerns. Economic activity risks stalling unless interest rates fall below 15%. That's according to Reuters. And analysts agree the defense-intensive model is unsustainable for the Russian economy much beyond 2025. Economic modeling projects near zero growth if reforms are not implemented or a pivot away from the war economy does not happen. That is quoting the Atlantic Council. While there are high moral stakes and strategic choices to be made, what should Western policy do to widen the cracks and exacerbate the economic tensions? Well, firstly, strength through economic pressure, sanctions targeting oil, secondary crude buyers, strategic exports and logistics routes targeting the lifeline of the Russian war economy with real sanctions bite. Removing sanctions, lifting them even from the secondary players that support the Russian war economy without any real concessions from Russia, risks emboldening further aggression from the Kremlin. That's according to CSIS. And of course, we must amplify the weak points, target dual-use military and civilian infrastructure, energy nodes, logistics routes, and tech component imports, areas where Russia remains highly exposed. We must also pressure Russia's partners, allies, and trading networks, bring the full force of international pressure to bear to isolate Russia from the world economy and cause allies and partners to peel away under threat of secondary sanctions and trade tariffs. This is the route that is apparently being taken by the Trump administration now. It is very powerful, but only if the administration stays the course. So to summarize, the IMF and others predict a sharp downturn, growth under 1% in 2025 and stagnation in 2026, according to Business Insider. Inflation has receded slightly, but only amid cripplingly high interest rates that throttle the civilian economy. Russia's wartime economic model, heavy defense spending, propped up by oil revenue, is faltering. A bit more pressure from the West, and it could start to fall apart. Disparities are widening with the civilian economy being burned up to support the military growth versus collapsing industry and collapsing consumer consumption and confidence. The moral imperative is clear. Sustain pressure on the Russian economy internationally, starve Putin of resources as one would cut the flow of blood to a threatening tumor.